Hello and welcome to the Scottish Roads Cast, a podcast about Scotland's roads, bridges and motorways, brought to you by the Scottish Roads Archive. I'm Duncan McKnight.
And I'm John Hassel.
And I'm Stuart Baird. Gentlemen, wonderful to see you. In this episode, we're going to talk about a junction that hasn't actually had a lot of love from us recently or for a long time, but given it's just turned 30,
Yes.
I thought might be a good time to bring it up and do a bit of discussion on it. So, where are we going? We are going to St James Interchange on the M8. That's the big one down next to Glasgow Airport.
Yeah.
Huge junction down there. Added 1993. Lots of good things to tell. Okay, we've missed the anniversary a wee bit. That was a couple of months ago, but you might remember from our social media that we had a wee bit of coverage at the time, and we've got a new webpage on it. So we thought, why not just have a wee discussion on it?
We do, and we've got tons of information about it as well, but we tend to bundle it in with the M3 bypass.
Exactly.
Because that's where it sits.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. So it is an interesting project. It's interesting for a number of reasons. The structures themselves are not actually particularly interesting, but the way it came about, the way it was built, the way it was, basically the contracts around it, that was all very interesting. And if we're honest, for that part of the M8, it actually stands out a bit like a sore thumb because you don't get the big flyovers down that end like you get in the city centre and further out towards Baillieston. So, it's a different kind of feature, as you come round the bend after the White Cart Viaduct. So, I'll just get straight into it, shall I?
Yep, you are the expert.
Oh, I don't know about that. And you actually wrote a page for us many years ago.
I was hoping you wouldn't say that. I was trying to avoid any work. But no, that's right. I did quite a lot of research back on this in the day when we didn't have anything. So, and now we have loads we got from Scott Wilson.
Yeah, so conscious that we have many listeners now from across Scotland, not just from the Glasgow area, so we should maybe give just a wee bit of a description of
where it sits.
Where it sits, right.
Yeah.
So we have the M8 motorway. That was completed in March 1968 as the Renfrew bypass, John, as you mentioned earlier. That's a section of M8 that runs between Hillington at junction 26 and Bishopton at junction 29A. Now, junction 29 at St James, that was originally a roundabout junction, with the roundabout sitting above the height of the motorway. Yeah. And for the first 20 odd years or so, it operated fine as it was. Mm-hmm. However, with developments going on around Linwood and in other parts of the area, particularly the expansion of Glasgow Airport as it started to handle more international traffic, there was much more pressure being put in St James generally. And when considered with the Strathclyde Regional Council proposals to dual or build a bypass of Linwood and Howwood, as what we now know as the E737, that was going to bring all this Ayrshire-bound traffic.
There was also
the junction as well.
And you mentioned about growth in traffic. There was also a lot of industrial development. At Linwood, there was a car plant as well.
Yeah. So there was a lot of developments going on. There was a lot of stuff happening there. And as I say, with this proposed dual carriageway, which, by the way, had been proposed all the way back in the Highway Plan for Glasgow back in 1965. And some of you might remember from the Highway Plan podcast that originally the motorway was going to continue as the Linwood bypass.
Yes,
the section off to Erskine Bridge and out towards Greenock, that was going to be all purpose. But there was a change made, and it was decided that the E737 or the E740, as it was at that point,
that's right,
was going to be the motorway.
Yeah, it's interesting. You drive along it and you go over the White Cart Viaduct, and it's all quite normal, and then it suddenly swings over to the north. You think, we're going the right way.
Exactly, you're absolutely right. And in those original reports in 1965, and in the Greater Glasgow Transportation Study, they actually stated that there would be a need for free flow, connections between this dual carriageway or motorway and the M8 at some point down the line. So when you look at some of the old schematics, they're always on there. Yeah. However, by the late 1980s, it was clear that the roundabout as it stood just couldn't handle it. They'd added signals earlier that decade. It still wasn't.
I mean, I've seen old maps before they were put in, and it looks like it was doing a lot of work for what it was. There was a lot going into
Paisley, the airport, and also the A740.
Yeah, absolutely. During peak times, apparently it wasn't uncommon for traffic to actually back up onto the motorway, onto the westbound carriageway, so that was creating safety issues as well. And the Scottish office in Strathclyde region were like, we really should be trying to do something about this to improve the situation there. Even today, it's a very busy junction. It's probably the busiest, probably the most important junction west of Glasgow on the M8. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I would. Yeah, Hillington's busy as well, but yes.
Yeah, so what Strathclyde Region did was, so they were appointed by Scottish Office to look into the potential improvements to the junction, and they conducted a study they went back to some of the original proposals for the junction, which we just mentioned in some of those earlier reports. And eventually they decided, you know what, the easiest thing is to build 2 free-flow connections from the new dual carriageway across the existing roundabout onto and from the M8 motorway. The existing roundabout junction would remain as it was to serve the local functions of the A726 coming out of Paisley and heading up towards Inchinnan, and also the access to Glasgow Airport as well, because they were looking to make a few changes there again as the airport expanded and made some changes of its own. So it was approved as a proposal in 1989, at which time it was decided to promote the scheme as a fixed price design and build competition. Now, at the time, that was quite a new concept.
Novel.
Yeah. So we spoke last year about the Keswick Bridge having a sort of design and build element for a particular structure.
Quite an early example of design and build.
This was the first time that it had been promoted as a fixed price design and build competition for this type of development. So, and not just in Scotland, but also in the UK. You know, that's how new it was. And it was expected that the project was going to cost somewhere between 30 and 40 million pounds as well. So a fairly high value at that time as well. So 13 firms expressed interest, 6 of which were then interviewed in the December of 1989. So they brought them all in and said, okay, what would you build? What would you build? How would you do it? How quickly? What would it cost? And they went through this process until they eventually whittled it down to 3 consortia. Okay, so they had 3 parties. Now, because this is design and build, you didn't just have your contractor, you also had your designer associated with that as well. So it's not like these old-fashioned schemes where we will say, oh, well, the designer was Strathclyde Regional Council, and then so came and built it. Although Strathclyde had pulled together what we would call a specimen design and say, well, there should be a flyover here and a viaduct there.
Like an outline.
Yeah, exactly. The detailed design was very much left to the party that was bidding for the work. So they had these 3 consortia brought in, and they issued contract documents to them in the May of 1990. They were told their tenders had to be returned by January of 1991. So they all went away, they all worked up the proposals and eventually submitted their final tenders. And in April 1991, the Scottish Office announced that Balfour Beatty, with their designer Scott Wilson Kirkpatrick, were going to be awarded the contract to design and build these 2 viaducts.
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
that's the story so far.
Yeah. It was never going to be easy to build these things because, well, let's think about this. You had a live motorway with several thousand vehicles in both directions every day. You had the 2 local roads coming in. You had the main Paisley to Greenock railway
below it. And
you also had an airport. So you can't just throw up cranes and things like that at the end of an airport runway without any consideration for the impact on air traffic. So all of these things actually meant that it was quite a complex project. And not just a case of just building a new bridge. There was a lot of considerations. And crucially, they knew from some of the boreholes and geotechnical investigations that they'd done that ground conditions in some areas were actually quite poor.
Right.
And interestingly, that actually led to a clause within the contract that was awarded to Balfour Beatty that they had to provide a 20-year warranty on certain parts of the groundworks.
Was it?
So that if there was a problem, they would then come back in later and rectify it. Now, jumping ahead a bit, there was never any major issues. However, there has been some settlement, and anybody who's a regular user of the viaducts will know that there's a bit of a bump when you come off.
Yeah, if you're heading eastbound, you do feel it when you go onto the start of it.
Yeah, so pretty interesting there. So a lot of things for them to consider. Okay, so April 91, contract awarded. What do we do next? Well, they have to start designing. There's no point in doing any work at this point, so they have to get into the intensive design phase. Scott Wilson obviously had been involved in a number of structures in the Glasgow area across the UK, synonymous with the M8, particularly in Glasgow at this point, so they were well known. And then throughout the 1990s, they did have this close partnership with Balfour Beatty.
Because it is something that does pop up, the Scott Wilson, Balfour Beatty, a couple of other things.
A very good relationship developed between the two, and they built a number of projects together across Scotland at that time.
A8 upgrade. Did they do Claylands, is it? At the
Claylands.
Yeah.
Scott Wilson did structures at Claylands. So there were a few tie-ins. Gogar
roundabout, yeah.
That's another famous one. So they were into a routine by this stage. Anyway, as the design work progressed, they more or less agreed with what Strathclyde Regional Council had envisaged, and that was going to be 2 multi-span viaducts, one for westbound traffic and the other for eastbound traffic. The need to keep costs low, because when you're on a fixed price and you've said we're going to build this for 35 million, you then can't go back to the client after a year and go, well, actually we need a bit more. You've committed to doing it for that price, you build it for that price. So they had to be very clear that everything was okay. And
I was
they
just
knew that
about
was
to ask what fixed cost is that basically. You can't go, can we get a bit more? Can we get a bit more?
The only way that can be different is something built in for like inflation or rising costs. I mean, a lot of construction projects lately have had this problem, where increases in costs have meant that exact scenario, Stuart, has happened.
That's right. And I mean, sometimes even things like concreting rates and things like that, but it's maybe difficult to predict the sort of quantities of things. You might have elements within the contract that allows for that. Not here. Fixed price, build it for what that's going to be. Simple. All right.
What could go wrong?
Absolutely, yeah. So the need to keep costs low meant that certain types of construction were ruled out. So certain materials were ruled out. That's specifically related to like post-tensioned or pre-stressed concrete structures, which are quite common.
It's very kind of 60s or 70s type thing. Yeah.
Pre-stressing is quite a common thing even today for concrete beams and things like that. But that was eliminated on cost grounds. Then they switched to steelwork. And they considered that was the obvious choice, particularly with the sort of span lengths that we were talking about. Although they did discount the use of a box girder solution like a White Cart Viaduct, for example, because the fabrication costs were expected to be high. It wasn't like in the 60s where you had multiple fabrication yards within a couple of miles. By the stage of the 1990s, they knew they were going to have to ship this material in from elsewhere in the UK. So it was like, let's not go with that. So ultimately they decided, you know what, keep it simple. Let's go with a nice composite structure. So that was basically steel plate girders and reinforced concrete decks for each of these viaducts. Yeah.
I was just about to ask, was there any other ideas? But it was probably the best solution.
It was always about functionality here over the aesthetic. Although the Fine Arts Commission for Scotland that existed at that point, they did have to approve the ultimate look of it, and they felt that it wasn't too ugly. It was functional. It had a reasonable degree of aesthetic. Personally, I think they're okay to look at.
I think it's how they sit in the ground more than anything. They don't seem to rise. They are quite high in areas, but they're not super high.
Tower up.
They don't tower. No. They're not like what I've seen in Texas, for example. You see these huge ramps that go up into the sky. Yeah. But it's quite funny. You with this choice of using the composite steel, you're almost sounding a bit like Dave Pritchard now, because it's good because you can see any issues or problems that might come out of these kind of things. Which is what Dave spoke about on our Connell podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it sounds like they made the right decision.
Yeah. Okay? Yeah, I would say so. I would certainly say so. So that need for it to be reasonably aesthetically pleasing actually led to the choice of these 50-metre span lengths. Right. So these are large spans. Between concrete supports. This is not just a small bridge, this thing's huge. It's very long. Thing. Yeah. So that also ensured that they could avoid particular obstacles. So like that busy live railway line we mentioned, the M8, the local road network, these things could be crossed with ease.
No need to move any services. Nice and easy.
Exactly. So the eastbound viaduct was designed to be an overall length of 790 metres across 16 spans.
Right. And
the westbound viaduct is 740 metres with 15 spans. Just as you would expect.
That's close to White Cart Viaduct lengths and Friar, and long things.
They're major structures, They are big viaducts in a Scottish sort of context. Some facts and figures here then for you. So each viaduct is 12 metres wide. Okay. Right. The carriageways themselves, they're 10 metres wide.
Okay. They're quite wide.
Yeah. The plate girders that support the decks are a constant 2.1 metres deep, with spacings of around 3 metres between them. So again, quite big. Each viaduct is curved in plan and has a gradient of up to 4%.
Right.
Okay, so there is a bit of an incline.
There is an incline, going up it.
And they have a maximum height above the ground of 15 metres as well. So they do get high at one point.
High, but not super high.
No. So fairly straightforward. They proposed that all steelwork be painted in a nice graphite colour. Which, as I mentioned, was approved by the Royal Fine Art Commission for Scotland. The feeling behind the grey is, we have a predominantly grey sky, and it blends in.
I was going to say, grey's very in now for interior design as well, so maybe they had a bit of foreknowledge on something like that. Stuart, would you have had it in the blue?
No, I wouldn't have had that in blue. There's just
you love Strathclyde blue.
Yeah, there's just too much steel work, I think, for that one, for the blue to have not just looked a wee bit out of place. I think the grey was a good choice.
Yeah, okay.
I would say so. Another interesting feature, I don't know if you've noticed, but there are high containment parapet railings on both sides of the viaducts, and both of them, they're pretty high. So obviously you've got the railway, you've got a bit of height, So they obviously
that makes sense. Sometimes with these things, you only see them where it crosses the railway component, but no, it's pretty consistent. And another thing about it, it's lit.
It's lit. Yes.
It's got
Now,
streetlights.
there was one of the reasons why we high mast lights would be in more normal setting around an interchange like this. Absolutely perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Airports, navigational lights and stuff. So they decided to go with columns for this reason.
Yeah.
So it's got steel columns along it.
Exactly. Yeah, and of course there had been original columns on the Renfrew bypass as
Yeah.
well, and much of them were upgraded around the same time. Because we should mention that there was some opportunity taken to upgrade the junction at Glasgow Airport and the access roads to the airport, and also some other changes around about St James as well.
What they done there was they come up with a braiding system. So it braided between was junction 28 for the airport to connect actually to junction 29 without really having to touch the motorway. So you've got these outer carriageways. Now they're not trunk.
No.
They are under local authority, and they were built as part of this contract.
Yeah.
So junction 28 for the airport did change slightly. Now, if you are heading eastbound, there's an old slip road.
I've seen that on the satellite. Yeah, this old dead bit of slip road.
Yeah, so that is still there because that was a part of the original layout.
Yeah, so some changes there as well. So yeah, you now access Glasgow Airport from the west via junction 29.
Yes.
Not rather than junction 29.
I can't remember the name of it. It's got a name. It's called something Parkway, and it has its own little sign there. I can't remember.
It's not Airport Parkway, is it? Or
I
something?
don't know. I'd have to go and have a little
Someone
look.
will know. Someone will know. Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, so design's all complete. We're all ready. We know what we're building. We know what we want. That's all good. Crucially, no hard shoulders included. We do have 1 metre hard strips, but no hard shoulders. I scoured through all the documentation we have on that to see if there was a reason, if they deliberately outlined it. I imagine that it was considered to be a continuation of the dual carriageway, rather than the motorway, which is why we don't have the hard shoulders in. I guess that probably saved a bit of money as well.
Even though they're kind of motorway reg, but I know to keep it consistent.
And we should bear in mind that this was a big time for that part of the world, as far as new roads were concerned, because we had the link from St James to Linwood that opened in 1968, just roughly the same time as the Renfrew bypass.
It's called the Linclive Spur.
The Linclive Spur.
We had that for ages.
Yeah, and they anticipated that the next section of dual carriageway all the way down to Elderslie and beyond would come very quickly after, but as is often the case here, that didn't happen. It was only once we get into the 80s that Strathclyde region started really pushing on that. So we did get the proposals for the Howwood, Johnson-Linwood bypass, and they came along and they were going to get built as dual carriageway. So, there's a lot going on in Renfrewshire at that time for roads, so it must have been, I often think how much of an improvement that must have been when that whole link opened from St James all the way down, say, to, what's the roundabout at the far end at Elderslie? That is Howwood, isn't it? At that Howwood end.
Howwood doesn't actually have a roundabout. It's like
is it a dumbbell?
No. Howwood itself is at the end of the single carriageway section of it, and it's just a kind of
it's a T-junction.
It's just a T-junction, really. But there is, it's further back at Kilbarchan, you've got that dumbbell.
So when you think about, before this was opened, you had to go all the way through Elderslie and Paisley to get to the motorway.
And it's funny, you can see where the old A737 is immediately after Howwood. It goes back to Qualton. You go to that notorious section that they call Risk Bray, which is a very much up and down section. I don't know why it's called Risk Bray, but it is, but that's with the double whites there. So no, you're right. Could we talk for a little bit about the 737? We haven't, maybe.
If you wish.
You told me something about this, Stuart, and why wasn't the rest of it duelled as part of this? And it was because the money
duelled as far as, is it Johnston or is it?
It's Kilbarchan, which is just after Johnston, and beyond that it's single carriageway. There is a reason for this.
Yeah, so the original proposal was the dual carriageway would continue from Kilbarchan all the way to the end of the existing A737 at, I can never remember the name. Is it Howwood, right?
Yeah, that was right.
Yeah. So the plan was dual all the way to there, and then the existing road would continue towards Kilwinning. So Strathclyde Regional Council said, well, you know what? We think that we should build the last section, a single carriageway.
All right.
And what we'll do is we'll take the money that we've saved and we'll invest it in local bus services. And what we'll do is we'll run a bus feeder service for those towns to the local train stations. Now, we have to bear in mind as well, there had been significant upgrades to the railway lines in that part of the world as well. Yeah. And there had been park and ride facilities and various other bits built as well. So rather than build another section of dual carriageway, they said, well, let's try and encourage people to use these new rail services we've just invested millions of pounds in. So they run this feeder bus service, or the theory was they would run these feeder bus services and it would all work hand in hand.
Yes.
However, unfortunately, 1986 comes along and bus deregulation comes in.
Oh, yeah.
And
the bugbear of Stuart's.
And the council are then no longer allowed to run bus services that they wish for their times, for their fares, whatever else. Had to be run as a private company. So that benefit there didn't last very long, sadly. And the project was much further along by that point, and they stuck with the single carriageway, to the end, to the Howwood end. So yeah, I can never remember who told me that story, but someone years ago when we sat down with him, was it Andy Davis?
Could have been.
Might well have been.
I think it was, because this is around about the time he was in there.
Yeah. Exactly. So it just goes to show, when we had the regions and we had all this joined up thinking, and everybody was trying to do, they could talk to the public transport people, and they could talk to the roads people, and they could talk to the policy people, and
now it's quite different.
It's all fragmented now.
Yes.
Much more difficult to do these things. So a wee interesting thing just to throw in there.
So back to St James.
Yeah, back to St James. Where were we? Construction then. So construction commenced in September 1991. Now, these things opened less than 2 years later.
Really?
This is the 1990s we're talking about. This is when we used to throw these schemes up. We would say to the contractors, you price it for this, we'll pay you, you meet this deadline. And they would. None of this, we'll build it in 3 years and it'll take 5. No. It was, you've committed to 2 years, you'll build it in 2 years. And they did. And that was the case with like the M74, Gogar, M8, through Edinburgh. All these things that all happened at that time, they were all done within specific contract, limits.
When I've done looking at other routes around about this time that they're all built, they're all done pretty quickly, and it's mostly reported a couple of months early.
Something we need to have a podcast about is that the 1990s was like the second renaissance for roads in Scotland. We had the intense period from 1960 to 1975 where we did a ton of stuff. Then there was a bit a lull with the change of government and the financial situation, and then comes along the late 80s into 90s, and my God, we're going for it again. We're building.
Do you think it had anything to do with the Roads for Prosperity white paper?
Very much so. I think there was some funding was then allocated again, and that allowed some of the projects. Now, I'm not saying the 1990s saw a whole load of brand new projects. In most cases, it was projects that had been spoken about in the 60s.
But they weren't done.
They weren't done for whatever reason, but they then came on and they did make progress in the A90 dualling and the M74 and other ones that were spoken about recently are good examples of that.
Yeah,
right.
No, I agree.
So I'm going off tangents again.
Yeah. No, it's okay.
Back to St James.
Yes.
So September 1981, work commenced, and what they did was they started in basically the middle of each viaduct and worked outwards in both directions. Right.
Okay. You'd have thought something like that. You start at one end and sort of work your way across.
You just push them out.
So you would launch it across.
Did they launch these then?
No. All the girders at St James were all lifted in by cranes.
Oh wow! And considering what you said about the airport earlier,
all lifted in by cranes, often overnight, often at weekends. There's some photos in the collection that clearly shows daytime closures of the M8, so I guess must have been a weekend closure. Not been able to pin down just the details of that yet, but we're still looking into that to see what we can find. Interestingly, all of that steel work came from Fairfield Maybe, who were obviously involved in a number of other, like Erskine Bridge.
Lots of stuff on the A9 that they did a lot of steel for.
Yeah, exactly. Well-known contractor, still in existence.
Still about. Wow.
Yeah, still providing steel work for things.
Fantastic.
Now, one of the other obstacles that we've not really mentioned was the football pitches at St James's Park.
Yeah.
So in advance of the main work starting, there was some adjustments made to the layout of the pitches there so that the road could fit in without the loss of any of the pitches below. And there was also a lot of real considerable utility diversion work done as well in advance, again as an advance contract. So that all happened. Erection of the steelwork, as I said, progressing each direction, with deck slab construction commencing when a sufficient length had been completed. So if they had like 50, 60 metres, they then come and cast the deck, and then they would do a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. The construction proceeded very quickly, and there was very few problems on site as well. Problems with the ground conditions did require, I think it said, around 25% more piles than they had anticipated.
Right.
But this only had a small impact in the overall programme. Again, that would have been absorbed within that fixed price.
So the piers are they all on piles, or some of them on
all on piles, as far as I know. All on piles, all two columns with a crosshead.
Right.
Nice and simple. And again, to keep costs down, it's the same profile used from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next.
Just location. Cromarty Bridge was the same, very much just keep it going.
Exactly. Absolutely. Nice and simple. It's all about but keeping those costs as low as possible and getting it built as quickly as possible.
Yes.
So construction had to be undertaken with minimal disruption to the substantial traffic flows passing through the site, with carriageway closures for installation of steelwork limited to overnights where possible, as I mentioned. Works to remodel the adjacent road system, including modifications to the layout around Junction 28 and Glasgow Airport, were undertaken in parallel, as John mentioned. Obviously, there's some additional roads that were built there. And in all, the contract saw the construction of 6 kilometres of new carriageway and required more than 4,000 tonnes of steel, 35,000 tonnes of concrete, and more than 3 kilometres of new safety barrier. And other works included the installation of the Glasgow-type overhead sign gantries.
Oh, yes.
Because they put in 4 or 5 of them around the junction. They then followed that with the contract to expand the SITRAC system from Clyde Tunnel Junction, Cardonald, all the way up to Hillington and out to Renfrew Road and out to Glasgow.
Because there
Airport.
weren't any Glasgow gantries on the Renfrew bypass before that.
That's
They're
right. Yeah.
they've got green signs going up to them. I've noticed them. I've gone, oh, right.
A737,
That's different.
737.
So that was all done as well. And there were also CCTV masts, and that all formed part of that expansion of the SITRAC traffic control system. They really pushed west and added several miles extra coverage in the system to that, which of course still exists today. Any questions at this point?
I actually do about this, and it's probably one for Duncan in the continuing quest for plaques. There is a plaque for the A737.
I was going to mention, there's a
it
plaque.
is down there, but is there a plaque specifically for the ramps?
Yes.
Because here's the thing. Where the heck is it? Because I was having a look around this area because I wanted to get some pictures. There's nowhere to park, and even if you could, it's very overgrown.
I think I can even. I can
Goodness
find it.
sake, John. Yes.
You
there
don't.
is
You know where this plaque is.
There is a whole site dedicated to the St James Flyovers.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I've seen that.
As you travel towards Paisley in the A726 and you
Yeah.
come to the first signalised junction, you turn left as though you were going to go into the St James's pitches.
Yes.
On the right, there's a small landscaped area, and on a small plinth that's actually cast from the same formwork used to make the concrete columns, there are several plaques lined up side by side.
I'm glad I brought this up.
You have a direct line of sight across to both viaducts across the pitches from there. Well worth a visit. Renfrewshire Council did some vegetation clearance recently. We might have nudged them. So it's all looking very tidy, and you can see everything again. So get down there and get a look. And yes, there is parking available.
Well, there's no excuse then, Duncan.
Excellent. I'll head over there right now.
I'll need to take John down for a wee look. The next
I
time
actually
we're
haven't
in
seen
there.
that, but I remember when you took me to the 737 one.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So they're
they are there. Now, some of the text is a bit difficult to read. They are obviously 30 years old now. However, you can kind of make it
can
out.
figure it
It's
out.
well worth a look.
But there you go.
Anything else you want to know on the construction? Or?
Nothing particularly on the construction. I know some thoughts and things I'd like to ask after that, but no, carry on. You're on a roll.
I was going to mention. I think there's a dead bridge left over for the old
There is.
approach to the roundabout.
So the approach to the roundabout from the west, where it crosses the railway, that dual carriageway originally crossed there.
Yes.
We now only use the eastbound carriageway of that
Eastbound
bridge.
up to it.
So there's a big dead area.
Yeah,
there.
I was just going to mention that because I'm like, oh, that must have been from long ago. So.
And that's a point. There was a new leg of the A737 constructed below the westbound viaduct.
That's
as
right.
well.
To get onto.
Yeah. So there was some modifications done there as well. But here's I've got a did you know moment
Right.
for you.
Okay.
Did you know that there was a footbridge that was demolished as part of this contract?
Yes, I do. Because I came across it with pictures once, and I was like, "What the heck is that?" And I remember you were quite surprised about it as well. And we looked into it, and there was.
So that was the Glasgow Airport footbridge.
Wow.
And what that did was that linked the old Barnesford Road across the motorway to the airport. Because historically, the A726 ran straight through where the motorway is, and there's still a row of houses there, and then through into the airport site, and then would have carried on. But when the airport runway was extended and various other changes in the motorway came and all the rest of it, they obviously wanted to maintain that link. But by the time this came along in 1991, say, I guess it was felt that connection was no longer required.
Yeah.
And the footbridge was demolished.
Cool down.
But there are a couple of photos in the archive where you can actually see
I was like, what is that?
Yeah. So that was an interesting. That would have been a good place to go for some photographs of the motorway.
Pictures, actually. There would have been another. Before you move on, does anyone here know much about something called Glasgow Airport Rail Link? GARL.
Oh, God, you can back
Not
it out
me,
now.
no.
So that was a plan. I think it was finally snuffed out in like 2008. or something like that, and that would have had a bridge going over this St James area, not quite over the ramps, but it would have been a viaduct that went over the football pitches, over the motorway there, and I remember these artists' impressions of it. It looked cool, and it would have taken the train right in at almost like the first story or one up in Glasgow Airport. So that would have changed things.
That would have been really impressive actually as well.
Yeah, it's a shame
cool.
about that.
Yeah, it is a really extensive interchange, and it just... It doesn't feel out of place, but it's just that you feel that once you've come through Glasgow, you've gone beyond all the
You're out of the city,
mega infrastructure.
Back
then
to roundabouts.
Back to urban motorway as soon as you get to Junction 27.
Even when you cross White Cart Viaduct, you're not really getting an appreciation of what you're driving on.
No, that's because of those Sistema barriers all the way along it. You can't see, because you used to be able to look out across
and see what's
and see the sewage.
Yeah. And all the other wonderful sites below.
Fantastic.
So, so it's only, you don't really get much impression of what you're driving on. Then all of a sudden you get to the airport and it's like, wow,
look at
what's going on again,
Yeah.
Okay, so that takes us to the opening of it then. Construction relatively smoothly, no problem there. Fired them up in no time, as I said, as we did frequently in those days. And they were officially open to traffic on Tuesday, the 17th of August, 1993. That ceremony attended by Lord Fraser of Carmiley of the Scottish Office and Councillor Malcolm Walk of Strathclyde Regional Council, both well-known guys in the sort of roads side at the time in the early 1990s. The project, which was joint funded by the Scottish Office, Strathclyde Regional Council and the European Regional Development Fund, cost £36 million, or equivalent to more than £75 million today. So a fairly significant investment, but worthwhile, I would say.
Is there an opening booklet?
There is. And
is there?
Yes, we have a couple of copies in the archive. It's on the page, Duncan.
Oh, so it is, yeah. Sorry, this is city centres, not for me.
Yeah. On completion of the project, congestion was eliminated from the St James roundabout. Now, we'll not say that remained the case forever.
No.
There is still congestion in that part of the world. However,
but it doesn't involve those ramps.
No, the ramps themselves are not the issue. It's the sheer volume of traffic heading east.
It's where you get the problem. Is if you're coming on the A737, you're going north to join the M8 East, it can queue there. But that's not the fault of St James. No. It's obviously because White Cart's only
it's
3
the constraint
lane.
of the viaducts. Because it goes from basically 4 to 3 and causes trouble.
There's your problem, basically. So Stuart, with the opening, when I remember looking back, there was some people who were complaining a little bit about it. Was it what was the general consensus? Was it quite well received, or was there some? I felt it was very like isolated individuals that complained, for like a kind of like certainly green interest groups and
you remember several years ago, you and I went to Paisley Library, and we spent some time going through some articles, some of the newspapers at the time, and there were pockets of resistance.
Right.
Very small.
Was it Friends of the Earth and these kind of people?
Yeah, it was those types of groups. Yeah. And there were 2 or 3 individuals that were particularly vocal, against the project. However, it had widespread approval.
Yeah.
And that's why it really went ahead. I mean, one of the things I've written in my notes is that it remains one of the most impressive motorway junction improvements undertaken in the UK, not just Scotland.
Oh yeah.
It was approved, designed, constructed, and opened in less than 5 years.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Considering now it's over 10. For that kind of thing.
So it was pretty rapid progress. Again, at that time in the 90s, we were making a lot of rapid progress on a lot of schemes. Design and build allowed you to do that, I suppose. And again, when you have the fixed price, that obviously helps. As well. So that's more or less everything we can say about St James.
Got a question for Stuart here. You were obviously stay around the Glasgow area. Do you remember the first time you saw it, or were you there at the opening? Or?
I asked him this.
How old do you think I am?
Oh, I couldn't ask that.
I asked you this when we were between podcasts.
I do remember seeing them for the first time and thinking, "Wow, they're big, they're huge." When were they built? And I was probably maybe about 12 or 13 at the time, the first time I saw them. And then I remember using them for the first time as a driver, which at that point, not really been aware of the dates of things, because this has gone back a long time. And I would have driven on them for the first time back in the year 2001.
Wow.
So they were only, 8 years old at that point, and they did still feel very fresh and new. So now when I look back and go, well, actually, they were only a few years old at that point,
They still do.
They still do look pretty good. I mean, every time I go over them, I think,
I don't have
nice.
that tired sort of look.
They
about
have aged very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, when you think of things that were built in 1960, how awful most of them look by 1990.
Mm.
When you now look at things built in the 90s now,
They look pretty good.
they're pretty
It's
good.
got
Yeah.
more modern
Yeah.
standards.
As
isn't it?
concrete tech developed and construction methods improved, things are lasting a lot longer than they used to.
I honestly have nothing bad to say about them, guys. I used to live in a part of Paisley that was quite close to Linwood, and I used them on a regular basis and really didn't have any issues. And I think they're a bit of a joy, to be honest. And yeah, no real complaints from me.
Now, something for you, John. In terms of the St James Junction itself, there's actually been further modifications to that roundabout junction. You'll be able to give us a bit of background as to why that is.
So what happened here is further along the road. If we head west, we get to Bishopton, and that's the site of the former Royal Ordnance Factory. So there was a development, or still is a large development there called Dargaville Village. BAE Systems are the people who obviously behind that development, and as part of the planning consent for that, they had to provide a new junction at Bishopton, new motorway junction, which was obviously the old terminus of the Renfrew bypass.
Yeah.
But also part of that was an upgrade to the St James interchange. But I know you might be thinking, are they going to build a tunnel? Are they going to make it a hamburger? Like what they've done down in England? No, it's new traffic signals, and they're also basically redoing some of the road markings and the layout. So they have actually done some of this now. When was the last time you were on St James, Stuart?
Oh, God, a few weeks ago, actually, yeah.
Yeah, with those things. So they have done some of these things because the impact on traffic, especially coming from the what they call the Barnesford Road, which is that road that goes around the airport perimeter and stuff like that, that would be an impact on.
Is that the one that comes off the north side of the roundabout and
That's
kind of
correct.
wiggles its way down? Yeah, I've always seen that and gone, where does that go?
Some trivia.
Worth a drive, yeah.
Some trivia about it. In work, you'll know this, Stuart. We call it the bowl.
The bowl.
The ball.
The bowl is the bit in between the bridges. It has kind of an egg shape. We call it the bowl. It's got some nice shrub planting in there. It's quite well landscaped.
And that all went in around about 93 as part of the St James works. Not done as part of the main contract. The landscaping was handled as a separate contract by the region, the regional council. So
that's fine. And another bit of trivia is civil engineer Stuart Baird managed to get onto the roof of the Holiday Inn to get a picture, legitimately, by the way.
I was going to use his private helicopter.
He got permission to get what was basically a general view of the St James interchange.
Fantastic.
And I'm hoping we still have that original image somewhere.
Yeah, we do. We do somewhere.
Good.
Yeah, we do. It was well worth it.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of night photography shots that we've got
from the same
light trails
place.
and things.
Exactly.
Yeah, they look great.
From exactly the same place. So yeah, listen, well worth it. I think it's a great project. I'm glad we've got a page up on the website about it. It's a project worth talking about. Yeah. So happy 30th birthday, St James Interchange.
Happy 30th birthday.
Here's to another 30.
Here's to another 30. I'm thinking it'll last.
It's one of these things that'll be quite safe, I think.
Yes, most definitely. It'll be the last man standing.
Do you know one thing? Just it's not to have any major maintenance, really, is it? I mean, you wouldn't, as you're a bridge engineer, Stuart, you'll know it's probably you wouldn't expect it in this part of its lifespan, but it's doing okay.
It's doing very well.
Yeah,
It's doing very well.
It's these 90s things. I was like the 90s bridges that Bear have got, like Dornoch Bridge and Skye Bridge, and they're doing pretty well. Where the stuff's older,
even 15, 20 years older than that.
Yeah, it gets. You need a bit to fix it, but this,
Yeah, that's where your money goes, people.
Yep.
Indeed it does. Well, listen, I hope everybody's enjoyed.
I've enjoyed this one.
I have indeed.
I thought it was going to be quite a little short subject. I thought we might have to include some other bits of road, but no, it's been good. And do you know, it's nice to have Duncan here. And
thanks for having me on a non-Highland one. This has been very interesting.
I know, we thought you're part of the old guard now. And if everyone noticed that Duncan actually introduced this one, I thought he'd done quite well.
Yes, we might even have you back.
Oh, thanks.
Why don't we pre-record your introductions and then we could just use him forever? We could just deep fake him throughout the rest of it.
John and I could retire.
Oh, that'd be cool.
If only. If only. Well, listen, in terms of things coming up, I've got a few new web pages coming up. The south and east flanks of the Inner Ring Road, that page is well on the way to completion now. That'll be coming up soon. That's been a long-standing aim.
For as long as I've known you, Stuart, we need to get the whole Inner Ring Road in.
Yep, so that's nearly done. That's nearly done. We have some other pages coming up as well. Duncan's working on a few. I'm working on a few. So we'll get them up on live. In terms of merchandise, all the booklets are still available on the website. If you've not snapped one up already, please consider that. The proceeds for those obviously help us to continue our work here.
They keep the lights on.
They do indeed. And likewise, thanks to the sponsors as well. So we've got Andy and the team at Eastford Excavations. Thank you to them. And Nigel and the team at HBS Scotland as well. So also big thank you to them.
Absolutely. Well, of course, I always say it, it's a social media. Please follow us on Twitter, or X as it's called now, on Facebook and on Instagram to get your daily fix. We do posts every single day. I've actually now finally got some really brand new and rather brilliant, I must say, then and now shots. We even managed to use the drone in one of them. So I'm looking forward to getting everybody's impressions of these.
Yeah, you've got another 13 weeks of those coming up.
Yeah.
Should be good.
It's going to be good.
Take us through the end of the year. All these podcasts are available wherever you'll find your normal podcasts. Apple, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, we're on there. We're everywhere.
We're everywhere.
Leave us a review.
All podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. Reviews are good. That gets us noticed. Calendar's coming up soon.
It is.
Yes.
Get your pre-orders ready for that.
We're getting some ideas together, the pictures this year.
We'll be at the Glasgow Vintage Vehicle Trust in October at the open weekend.
Yes.
Watch out for some information on the social media for that too.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think that's more or less everything for this
I
one.
think that's covered everything. Yep, it's been good.
And Duncan will be back with some podcasts later this year on the A90 and the A82. So
yes, indeed.
Stay tuned for those.
Yep.
Right.
All right.
But thank you for now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.